our state of brain functioning dictates all of our interactions. So when we think about learning in the classroom, learning is not just paying attention and memorizing information. We learn through our senses. We learn through what we hear and what we see, but also what we feel. And then we synchronize all of that information instantaneously. Our brain protects our resources. However, when there's immaturity or stress or aging and degeneration, we lose that ability to filter.
Curious parents, educators, and everyday adults who want to understand their brains and their kids' brains better without a neuroscience degree. They're looking for science-backed insights that feel empowering and actually doable. Dr. Rebecca Jackson has spent over 15 years shaping programs that optimize brain function for kids, teens, and adults alike. She's an industry leader with a knack for showing how the brain influences everything we do, how we feel, focus, and even connect with others. Her passion? Creating hope and actionable plans for anyone looking to unlock their potential. Today, we will explore, why do we do things we do? How does brain function show up in our moods, energy, and even our relationships? And what can we actually do about it? So let's get started. Here's how we can all hack our way to healthier brains and better lives. Good afternoon, Dr. Jackson. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Joe, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to get to talk to you offline and learn about you. And when I saw your bio and your website, I was very, very, very interested in talking with you. I think the space you work in is truly fascinating. And I was curious, first off, like, what led you to focus on brain development and performance? Like, was there something personal that connected the dots maybe between behavior and brain health for you, or something else?
For me, it was the passion of being a new mom. My primary or original professional career was as a chiropractor. So I've always gravitated towards a holistic approach to health and wellness. So I've always been fascinated and think nutrition and how we eat and function is so important. And then as a new mom, my husband's job had moved us across the country. I had sold my practice. And so was excited to be the stay-at-home mom and to be the vision of the mom I had in my head, like the mom I had growing up. And I learned very quickly I needed mental stimulation. And so I needed to go back to school. I needed engagement. And what I was finding as I was reading is I wasn't getting the information I wanted in the parenting books out there. It felt light and fluffy to me. Sing songs, play patty cake, all that stuff is good. But I wanted to know what was happening or not happening in infant and childhood development that results in challenges or people being able to excel. And so I found myself back in school. And one of the very first courses I took was the neurology of dyslexia. And I called my husband and said, Doug, you're dyslexic. And he was traveling with his dad at the time. And he said, no, I'm not. And his dad piped up in the background and said, yeah, you are. And my husband, he is a brilliant guy, hard worker, went to Vanderbilt. So that had never occurred to him, but there were just some things that he had to put different strategies in place for, things that he had to work harder for. So then that started to pique our interest on a more personal level of what if there was something that we could do to strengthen or change the way your brain processes information. And what if that pertained to our kids? And so for me, it really came down to just wanting to do the best I could for my own kids. And then the more I learned and realized that these approaches aren't being integrated into daily life and daily practice at school and in traditional approaches, then I was driven to become a part of creating the possibility for change in kids now, rather than waiting the average 17 years to when research gets applied in practice.
And how was that when you started? Because I find it very interesting. A lot of chiropractors now, and again, growing up, I was, it's like, oh, you need an adjustment or something. But these are some of like the most brilliant minds that are leading maybe the functional medicine space or holistic nutrition, whatever it might be. How was it sort of received when you were in school and you had these credentials, but you wanted to shift into this space that you're in now?
That's a great question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that before, but I think it's interesting where, to me, I think what we need is a team approach. Everybody has their specialty. And when you have a specialty, you're always going to look at things through the lens of your knowledge and experience. So my mom is an elementary school psychologist. And so she's going to look at supporting behavior in the classroom through the lens of behavior modification, guidance and support, not looking at it through the lens of what's happening in the brain or not happening resulting in a child that has a hard time sustaining and directing attention or can't regulate their mood and emotions in the way that their peers sitting next to them can. So, but then there's also been, I think, some resistance of traditionally it's psychologists and psychiatrists that are primarily working in the ADHD space for attention. And that's good and necessary, but we haven't changed our approach in the past 3 decades much at all in some of this space. And so having some new perspective and some new experience to say, absolutely. We need to provide support to parents to know how to motivate and discipline and guide their children. But what if we combined that with specific sensory motor and cognitive exercises that can change how the brain functions? And what happens when we pair the two together? So I don't think I have all the answers and all the solutions, but I have personally, through my 17 years at Brain Balance, I have watched through specialized programs, I've watched change happen. And then in the research that I've done, I've seen it in the data. Change is possible, and we need to do a better job of working collaboratively to not think any one of us has the answers, but how do we do better supporting things?
Oh, no, I love that. I think just talking to people, if you say brain health, they might think, memory or what's your IQ, but to look at it more holistically, what are we actually looking at with brain function in everyday terms, if you don't mind explaining that?
Yeah, well, let's start by just talking about brain health because you're right. I say brain health and I get an instant picture of what I think it is. I've recently, in having a lot of conversations, everybody kind of has a different personal definition. So a lot of people, when they think brain health, think mental health. A lot of people, if you're dealing with an aging loved one or family member, you're really going to think about it in terms of dementia and decline. But brain health is simply the state of your brain. It's how you process and take in information, and your brain is what dictates your mood, your emotions, your actions, how you learn. And so brain health is really the state of being across your lifespan from birth until death. And I think all too often we don't consider our brain health until something goes awry. So you've got and we don't even really think about brain health when we're talking about ADHD. But yet the reality is an individual with ADHD has aspects of brain functioning that are different, that's going to make aspects of life more difficult. So brain health to me is how your brain takes in, processes, and reacts to information. It's how you handle stress in everyday life scenarios, and it's our quality of life. So that to me is what brain health is.
Yeah, I would wonder for a lot of people that might be in that sort of camp that you're describing, mood, focus, energy, would that apply though to like how well we have interpersonal relations with other people?
100%. You and I having a conversation, if I'm struggling with auditory processing and I'm only catching bits and pieces of what you're saying, that can change our interaction. It can change my stress levels of, am I following, missing something? And so our state of brain functioning dictates all of our interactions. So when we think about learning in the classroom, learning is not just paying attention and memorizing information. We learn through our senses. We learn through what we hear and what we see, but also what we feel. And then we synchronize all of that information instantaneously. And so again, if there's any disruption or dysregulation in any of those experiences, it's going to change your mood. It's going to have an impact on what you're taking away from that, whether it's learning something new about you or learning a new math problem and applying a formula in chemistry. There is an impact on those experiences. And if you have, for example, dysregulation in sensory input, your brain may now not trust what's happening around you, or you might be on high alert of not knowing what our brain automatically filters information for us. So you and I, as we're talking right now, we're going to be really focused on each other. So I'm tuning out the rolling thunder happening in the background and my daughter cleaning her bedroom above me right now. Our brain protects our resources, so I'm not having to process all of it at the same time. So I'm just focused on you. However, when there's immaturity or stress or aging and degeneration, we lose that ability to filter. So now my brain's processing everything because my brain doesn't know what bits and pieces of that information are important. So again, our state of brain health is going to change how we're taking in information.
Yeah, because you work with kids, teens, adults, right? Like the whole gamut of life, so to speak. When it comes to brain development, Would you say that's foundational to kind of everything we do in a person's life from birth?
100%. And it's interesting to me because we really talk about development a lot in the early years, right? When you're pregnant, you can get the day by day, it's the size of a walnut and now the size of a grapefruit. We get developmental information day by day in utero. And then the infant's born, and we've got those developmental milestones that we're watching from birth to age 2. This is part of why I wrote the book Back on Track, is I wanted to provide people with what are other motor milestones and other developmental milestones beyond age 2, and what do milestones look like developmentally with anxiety, with learning, with social interactions, with executive functions. So what does age appropriate development look like? But then we stop talking about development beyond those early years. But yet, your skills and abilities today, Joe, as an adult, as a parent, are dependent on your development as a child. So what development is the refinement of the neural connections in your brain. So everything starts simple and builds in complexity over time. So your brain develops more complex networks and pathways, so you can do more complex movements and then start to synchronize thoughts and actions. So everything starts simple. A 2-year-old has the attention span for just a few seconds. A 10-year-old should be able to pay attention for up to 20 minutes. As an adult, we should be able to pay attention for even longer. We're not born with attention. That happens on top of that foundational development. I really think of those higher level brain functions as the result of your development. So if you're an adult and you're struggling to direct and sustain attention, or struggling to show up on time and get things done, we think of those as behaviors, but the reality is that's a result of your development. But the good news is the brain can change at any age, and so you don't need to feel stuck. There are things that you can do to exercise, strengthen, and change the networks and connections in your brain to see improvements in those areas, even as an adult.
So I don't know if it's fair to say, but when someone describes the word behavior, is that a reflection of the brain, like maybe doing its job, whether that's a good or a bad job based on how we developed as a child?
Yeah, I'd say that's a fair statement. If we think about, let's talk stereotypical behavior with a child with ADHD. It is so easy as parents and educators and caregivers to look at the actions as choice. And we get really mad about behaviors, right? How many times do I have to tell you, you did the work to finish your math assignment? How did you not turn it in? That's a behavior, right? That's an action. You know better than to hit your brother when you're frustrated, but you did it again. That's a behavior. That's an action. And as parents, we get, you didn't hang up the wet towel. You didn't brush your teeth without me telling you to. I always say, as parents, if you're finding yourself saying, why can't you just fill in the blank? You're frustrated about a behavior that's a result of something happening or not happening. So part of development is the more mature we are in our development, the better we are with control. So control is going to stop an action from happening. So stop me from hitting my brother when I'm frustrated. The child that hits their brother when they're frustrated, when they've gotten in trouble for it 10 times, if you said, are you supposed to do that? They know the answer. They're lacking the control in the moment. And that control comes from inhibition in the brain, stopping an action that shouldn't happen. So that doesn't mean that I don't believe that we should hold people accountable for their actions, but I think we need to take development into consideration. So do you have the appropriate development to meet the expectations and the demands of what I just placed on you? So maybe we've got a 10-year-old sitting in front of us, but that 10-year-old's development might be behind. And so I might not have expectations that are appropriate for that child.
Yeah, because I feel a lot of people, adults, I have a child and children, and talking to them versus friends, focus, anxiety, emotional regulation. A lot of people struggle with these. I think they might just say, oh, okay, that's just who I am. ADHD, I have a friend that's, I've always had it. It's just, I can't focus. And it's just the way it is. Do you find that is that a limiting belief?
I do think it's a limiting belief. And there is no shame in ADHD. It just tells me there are structural differences in the brain. It also tells me that some things are going to be more challenging than what it needs to be. So some strengths that can go along with that. Somebody that has ADHD, their attentional networks and pathways in the brain is going to shift more into what's called the default mode network. That's your brainstorming, your daydreaming activity. And so I run in the morning and I don't listen to podcasts because I want my default mode network to be active, because that's where we brainstorm, that's where we're creative, that's where we make connections. My best ideas always happen in the morning. And so I often do voice recording notes as I'm running, and just because you have an idea. So that's your default mode network. But the default mode network also scans past and future. And so you might find yourself worrying about something coming up in the future, or really fixating on something that happened in the past that brings up bad feelings. So we can also see with ADHD increased levels of anxiety and depression, and that default mode network can play into that some. So there's strengths in that. Here you've got an individual that's spending a lot of time utilizing creative pathways, but the challenge is they're often utilizing those creative pathways at the wrong time. So you shouldn't be using those pathways in the middle of a conversation or in the middle of math class, but those are pathways that are more active. So if we can mature the brain and strengthen your ability to direct and control, now you get to tap into that network when you want to, when it's the appropriate time, and stop yourself from mind wandering. So you don't lose the gifts and talents of using the default mode network, you just gain better control over it. So to me, ADHD is structural differences in the brain that can create up to a 30% deficit in some areas of skills and functions. So it can make some things more challenging.
Absolutely. Like I always look when I read about, brain health, eat blueberries or right, like whatever foods, but the nutritional component of it, and kids eating, ultra processed foods and these diets that many Americans are on, and of course many people globally are on. UK has a lot of processed, foods, ultra processed foods. When we look at diet and nutrition, though, how much of a factor do you think these are playing into these ailments that people are dealing with, like the ADHDs and anxieties?
What we eat is the fuel for our brain. And so what we eat has an impact on us every day. So there's an immediate impact, but there's also a long-term impact on our brain health. So when we're consuming foods that are really high in sugar or ultra processed, so it's driving up that systemic inflammation, that's just creating muck and extra wear and tear and essentially fog throughout our body. So a brain that has amazing connectivity, that's mature and has control, but then has all the systemic inflammation, you're not tapping into the true potential of that brain. So what you eat, and for kids, it's the building blocks for growth and development. Our body creates some of the essential, some of the amino acids that we need are created, some we get through what we eat. And so if we're not getting a wide variety of nutrients, then we can have gaps and holes in those building blocks. And so what we eat is so important. I think for the most part, it's not necessarily creating or causing some of the conditions, but it can be an accelerator for good or an accelerator in the wrong direction.
Yeah, absolutely. When you mentioned inflammation, where do you think the majority of this inflammation is being derived from?
Good question. I'm going to start with ultra processed foods. Even if you look at the difference between how I ate as a child growing up and how what's available today, we are consuming so many more in the way of ultra processed foods. And I get it. No shame. Just knowledge is power, learn, and then try to make small steps to make big differences in your life. But I'm a parent. I work full time. I've got 2 kids. That one plays travel hockey. Life is busy. And so the quick convenience that tastes good to the kids, and that are fast and affordable, it's really easy to fall in that consuming those foods. But I was meeting with a naturopath a couple weeks ago, and he said something that he phrased it just so well. And he was talking about, look, if the environment can't break down a food that's been sitting in your pantry for months or years, your body can't either. And so when we have these prepackaged processed foods that have an unending shelf life, then your body's not going to break it down either. So your body has to work harder in order to break it down. And then there's fewer nutrients there to pull from it. So yeah, it's fast and easy and convenient, but what are you actually getting from that? You're not getting nutrients. You're getting taste. So it might satisfy you in the moment, but you're going to be hungry again faster. And there's a cost to that wear and tear. So with my own kids, I try to find a balance of, I was super strict when they were little. Like I wanted us to eat perfect. And then reality hits, right? But we try to have the mentality of fuel first. First, give your brain and body what it needs. So snacks and treats aren't bad. I don't want a good food, bad food mentality. We want to, balance in moderation, but let's lead first with what we need. You've got a test tomorrow, you're studying tonight, you've got a 2-hour practice. What do you need to make that time effective? And yeah, if you're still hungry, I love a cupcake too. It's just we don't want to lead with that.
Maybe like an 80-20 rule of whole
Yeah.
foods to,
Yeah.
have fun.
But then also learn what is that 20% that is less harmful to you. So I have a son that cannot have gluten, and in navigating that with my son, I've learned how it reacts to me, and it doesn't show up in lab work, but it shows up in other ways. And so if in my 80-20, to me, if I'm going to do a cupcake, it's going to be a gluten-free cupcake. And so even in my eating less healthy choices, there are things that are going to have a bigger impact on me than others. For me, if I have gluten, my back gets achy. It just spikes my inflammation just enough that I can tell the next day if I've had gluten by how my back feels when I wake up in the morning, and just that mental sluggishness, just kind of that brain fog that impacts mood and energy. So that learning has helped me guide some of my personal choices in that.
Well, I'm with you. It's very hard to find a study that tells you gluten is easily digestible or something good for you.
Yeah, but the problem is we're replacing it. The gluten, just because it's gluten-free does not mean it's healthy. And that's going gluten-free. I find people are really healthy in the beginning, and then they start to find all these gluten-free replacements. And it's awesome and amazing that we've got quick, handy replacements. But again,
you're right. It's you go down the rabbit hole of, okay, now what's the alternative doing to me?
Right, exactly.
So can we talk about brain balance?
Yeah.
And what that is, and what listeners here can learn about what you do there in your work.
Brain balance is a holistic approach to helping to mature the brain and development to improve performance. So we work with kids, teens, and adults, and it's a multimodal approach, which means we're bringing in really a lot of different approaches and tools into one really comprehensive program. So we start with an assessment where we're looking to identify the key indicators of development. Are you on track for your age, or are there aspects of development that are lagging behind? Regardless of your age. If you're an adult, there can still be gaps. With adult, we really talk about it more as performance rather than development. But the reality is it was your development that creates your performance abilities. So then based on that assessment, we create a personalized program that through multisensory stimulation, physical activities, cognitive activities, it's a comprehensive program to close the gaps in development to then have an impact on. And we see really consistent, significant results in improved sustained attention, improved inhibitory control, emotional regulation, reductions in anxiety. Because it's addressing really whole brain activity, we see a really widespread impact on the domains of brain health and performance.
So when someone comes to you, I mean, of course, like you said, it could be a child development, could be an adult, right? Is it more like high-tech neurofeedback or supplements, or is it kind of depend on the person and what they might need at that time?
Our assessment, we're starting really foundational. We're going to look at a set of developmental reflexes to say, are the reflexes performing the way they should at your age? Then we're looking at things like balance, coordination, rhythm, and timing. So some aspects are really low tech. They're really looking at basic developmental functions that still are the scaffolding for our higher level abilities. You cannot coordinate your mind and thoughts until you can first coordinate your body. Then there's other pieces that are much more high tech. One of my favorite things to look at is eye tracking. Our visual system is so complex, and we give our visual system very little thought. But as we develop, our eyes should move very quickly, accurately, and with speed and endurance. And if they don't, there's a very direct impact on things like reading. Are you jumping over lines and words, or are you consistent in how the eyes move? But our eyes are actually, it's all of our interactions. As I glance at you and the clock, or I'm, reading in a textbook and taking notes, when our eyes are fast and efficient, it's giving our brain really quick, accurate information. When our eyes are less efficient and miss the target and have extra movements, that's hugely fatiguing on the brain. And a tired brain doesn't do as well paying attention, regulating mood and emotions, making memories. So making sure that our visual system is optimal has a huge impact on executive functions and attention. So being able to have a live playback of this is how your eyes move during these tasks. This is what it looks like when you read. This is what it looks like when you're tracking an object. That shows me what's possible. Are you where you need to be, or is there an opportunity to enhance these functions to have an impact on how you feel and function? So that's an example of one of the higher tech pieces. And then using technology for other aspects of cognition. So working on attention, inhibitory control, working memory, all things that we rely on a daily basis.
Okay, so are you also looking into things like sleep, for example? Like, kids, a lot of parents I talk to are like, oh, my kid's sleeping 12 hours a night. But when obviously you get into the teen years and into adulthood, that tends, like you said, travel club teams and getting up for school, but then you're up late for practice and sleep does take a hit. So are you looking at sleep patterns in that regard?
We cannot talk about optimizing brain health development and performance without talking about lifestyle. So there's absolutely a nutrition component to the program. And we do talk a fair amount about screen time and then some as well about sleep. I wouldn't say that we track and study sleep patterns, but a growing, developing brain requires rest. Rest is when our brain cleans itself up. It's when repair happens. It's when memories are formed. And when we're doing a program that's accelerating development, that brain is working so hard during the day. And so it's even more important to be getting great sleep while you're doing the program. So yes, we absolutely have conversations around the importance of sleep. And like you said, our lives are so busy and it gets challenging. Once our kids have a device, and if that device is in their room, years where they are staying up way too late if we're not intentional, and we do the same thing as adults.
Yeah, the circadian rhythm. I mean, again, these things that are popping up now that, there are people that have been studying these things for decades. And again, back then, it must have been, oh, what, where are you going with this? I don't even understand, or this is BS. But now we're starting to see, and now as technologies and the blue light, and it's crazy the things that are popping up. And like you said, screens, obviously, is it best, do you think, for parents to have a limit on the screen time each day?
I do. And I'm going to say this is a personal topic. And again, no guilt, no shame.
No, yeah. I mean, I'm probably more
Learn-
guilty of the other way.
Yeah, but it's finding that balance and it's understanding what's the impact. And so, and I think we should always start with ourselves. What am I doing? What are my actions? What's the impact on me? Because I understand it the best of myself. And then how do I apply what I'm learning to my kids? And so what we know, we're going to talk about dopamine, and our brain is going to seek out what makes us feel good. There are a lot of dopamine triggers that are healthy, and there are a lot of dopamine triggers that are unhealthy. And then there's things where they're healthy when it's in the right balance. I love a glass of red wine. It's Friday night. That's what's going to happen later on this evening. That's a perfect example of that's a dopamine trigger for me, that a little bit of wine's okay. A lot of wine all the time is not. It's the same thing with screens, where our brain is going to start to create patterns and habits throughout our daily life to seek out our dopamine triggers. And so again, I've learned what my dopamine triggers are. I wake up in the morning so that I can have a cup of coffee. And then I drink that coffee so I can go for a run. Triggers that get me out of bed in the morning. And so those are, I'd say, relatively healthy dopamine triggers. But so learn what those triggers are in yourself, and then learn what those are in your kids. Watch your kids, and you're going to know what their dopamine trigger is when they don't have it. And they're like, where is it? So is it sugar? Is it time with friends? Is it, I look at my 15-year-old son, his dopamine triggers are sports and activities. He's either fishing or golfing or, hockey. So he's not one that's on his phone much because he's out active that way. Learn that from watching him. What is he choosing to do in his own time? What is he seeking out? So by watching your kids, and if you're taking away the tablet and there's a meltdown, or that's the first thing that they're looking for when they wake up in the morning, or that's the first thing you're doing and you're in a panic if you don't have it, that might be a sign, hey, we've got to check the balance here. And why I really care about that balance when it comes to a developing child is sensory stimulation and motor movement are the two biggest drivers of development. Not learning in the classroom, not teaching information, but moving and interacting and engaging. And every minute that you're on a device, you're not moving and interacting and engaging in a way that's driving overall systemic development. So can kids have screens and devices if that's an okay thing in your life? Yes. But we really need to make sure that we're balancing that so that it's a little bit of time on a screen and a device. That's not their sole dopamine driver, and that they're getting a lot of movement, multisensory. They're inside, they're outside, they're interacting with people of all ages. They're experiencing all the smells and all the things of being in different environments, because that's what's going to contribute to their overall development and well-being. Something on the phone, even if it's an educational app, isn't contributing to development in the same way.
No, I love that. Your son sounds like he gets a lot of sunlight too, which I can imagine is a positive on his sleep later in the day, because you're just out there, or sports. Obviously, hockey's inside, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, and you're exactly right. He's at this age, given he's grown a couple inches in the last couple months in his physical activity level, he could sleep till 12:30 every afternoon if I let him, unless he's got plans to fish, and then he's up at 7:30.
Oh, that's amazing. But well, how about another term? Okay, we read a lot about neuroplasticity, and I think the average person might not really know what that means. I think you've mentioned the brain is changeable. For someone that's kind of new to that concept, what exactly does that mean in real life?
Yeah. If we take the word and break it down, neuro means brain, plastic means changeable, moldable. So neuroplasticity is literally just the concept that the brain can change. And this has been a breakthrough in science several decades ago that really shifted perspective. When I was growing up, if you talked about IQ, it was really thought of as this like carved in stone set thing. You have the IQ you were born with, and that is the person that you are. And we now know that that's really an outdated concept. Things are really much more fluid and flexible than just you are who you are and who you were born with. And then we had these theories and thinking of the importance of early intervention, which is true. But then there was this, well, if you haven't done anything, then you've lost that window of time to create change. And I feel like parents still live in that thought pattern of, I hear it from people all the time. I wish brain balance existed when my child was younger. You know, they're a teenager now, or now they're an adult. No, the brain is changeable. And neuroplasticity has taught us that the brain can change at every age. It might take a different strategy or a little bit more energy and effort at different stages and phases in life, but the brain is able to change. So there are these wonderful windows of time through childhood where a lot of growth happens in a short amount of time. And so that's where early intervention is great. The sooner you can close a developmental gap to set somebody up for success, the smaller that gap is, and the more it's going to impact the rest of their life. So all day long, early intervention. It's not too late. There's never a time when you can't step in and make a positive difference through targeted, specialized exercise and activities. It's like working out. If you wanted to work on getting stronger, you could get stronger at any age. How you do that might look different if you were 90 versus 20 versus 12, but you could still do bicep curls so that you're targeting a specific muscle, and then do a functional fitness movement of playing catch or pushing something so you're using that muscle in action. It's the same thing with the brain. If we want to exercise and improve attention, first we need to make sure that everything that leads to the development of attention is in place, and then you can exercise those specific pathways. So we can, just like you do a bicep curl, we can target a network and pathway and then do it over and over and over again to make that connection stronger, faster, and more efficient. And then we put it in function. So you're never only doing one thing with your brain at a time. You're doing lots of things all together. So functional fitness with the brain is, can you pay attention while processing what you hear and see and feel? So making sure that all of those things are synchronizing and working together. So neuroplasticity allows us to and guides us in how to create change in the brain.
Oh, that's great. That makes perfect sense. How about like a brain balance? Like if someone wants to know the difference, maybe you use the reference of hitting your little brother, or we talked about screen time with teens and even younger kids. You go to restaurants, you see every kid has a tablet anyway. How might a parent differentiate like brain function versus bad habit?
Yeah. Again, I'm going to go back to, where's that bad habit coming from? And first, we want to make sure that the development is where it's supposed to be. So there are, each stage of development has positive and negative behaviors that is a part of typical development. Each phase of development is a child seeking independence, pushing boundaries, exploring. So there is a typical phase of development where a child's going to lie. They should move through that phase of development. There is a picky eating phase of development that is a normal part of development. So the problem comes in is when that developmental phase happens in the wrong window of time or is lasting too long. So for me, I'm always going to go back to say, are things on track? And if they're not, what can we do to alter that? So, let's take a habit. Okay, let's say we've got a child that's always chewing on something, like chewing on their shirt, chewing on their fingernails. That's a bad habit that a parent could try to discipline, or, we're going to put a glove on your hand at night, or we're going to try to every action to me is a signal of what's happening in the brain, and oftentimes our actions are telling us what we need or want. So there is a reflex that infants should be born with that's called the rooting reflex. That's a survival mechanism. So think back when your kids are first born. If you touch an infant's cheek, they turn to latch. That's what allows a brand new baby to suck, swallow, and eat. So it's a reflex. They have no control over it. They turn into the sensory stimulation, they latch on, and they start sucking and swallowing. That's a reflex that the brain, as you mature, should no longer be a reflex and you control. So if I touched your cheek, Joe, you should not turn and latch on. Awkward. But if that reflex is still present in a child that's older, then that child's often going to be craving and seeking sensory stimulation with their mouth. And so it can play out with the kid that's putting everything in their mouth and chewing on things and chewing on their shirt. The brain is seeking out what it needs to develop that aspect of development. So before I discipline the action, I want to first address why it's there in the first place. So let's mature that reflex so the brain turns it off, so that brain no longer has the craving. And now let's work on redirecting that. So I think of it like if you were going to quit smoking, you've got to get over the nicotine craving, and then you need to figure out what to do with your hands when you're interacting with somebody, right? There's the addiction and the habit part of it. I think of that with the reflexes of first we need to change what the brain's craving and seeking in the first place, and then it's going to be much easier to overcome that habit.
So is it fair to say that we could apply the same lens to an adult, like to use your smoking example?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, 'cause reaching for coffee because I can't do this until I get, I'm like you, right? In the morning, that's the first thing you want.
Yeah.
But some people struggle to focus before they even have the coffee. It's the brain fog or whatever in the morning, and they think, okay, this caffeine is going to help me automatically get my focus back.
Yeah. And it will to a certain extent, right? It's gonna give us, but it's not going to create a window of opportunity that doesn't already exist. It'll pick you up, but if the focus isn't there, it's not there.
What would be like someone listening today, whether, maybe a parent or, themselves for their child, one thing that they could maybe do today to feel more in control of their brain? Because I think you bring up great points. Can you not stare at your device first thing in the morning? And if not, why not? What are like some simple things people can start doing that maybe like actionable that they can start taking today?
Yeah. One of the things that I love to teach my own kids and others to just empower you for that, to feel a little bit more in control, is being aware of your mood and knowing what you can do in the moment to pivot or alter that. So one of the things that I say all the time is that a tired brain is a negative brain. So if you find yourself having negative thoughts and feelings, that's your brain sending you a message that it needs something more in that moment. So our brain's going to go negative when we haven't had enough sleep, we don't have the fuel, or we're feeling overwhelmed with what's in front of us. So maybe I just had a work meeting and I've got 3 major deadlines and it's all due Friday, and there are not enough weeks between now and Friday. When I'm feeling overwhelmed, that's me, my brain saying, you don't have the resources you need to do what was asked of you. So when you find yourself in a negative state, or when I observe my kids in a negative state, when I'm starting to get this sucks, that teacher, or I can't do this, or, whatever it looks like at your age and stage in your household, I press pause and think, what's needed right now? I can't change the fact that you stayed up too late last night, but I can have you take 3 to 5 minutes to spike your heart rate and exercise, and that's going to re-engage your attention and focus and shift your mood. I can make sure that we plug you in with a snack that's got some protein and carbohydrates so that we quickly fuel you in a way that's going to support that. So it's be aware of when you're negative, press pause, and figure out you can influence that in that moment. And I want my kids to know that, because we're going to hit hard things in life. They're going to go away to college, and I'm not going to be there to say, When was the last time you ate something with protein? And so wanting them to know what they can do and influence. So when you're negative, press pause, evaluate. And to me, the easiest back pocket trick is muscles. When we engage our muscles, it wakes up your brain. It signals to your brain to pay more attention, take in more information. So if you're having a hard time focusing, if you're groggy and sluggish or stuck, taking just a few minutes to engage your muscles and spike your heart rate resets your brain. So that's your no cost, no effort, just learn that strategy and you can implement it anywhere, just about anywhere that can have an impact.
That's great advice. How about for parents that have children with autism? Is that something that brain balance works with, or is that within the scope of work you do?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, at Brain Balance, we really approach things less through the lens of what the diagnosis is and more through the lens of where are you at in development. We're measuring the same aspects of development on all people, regardless of if you're coming to us because you're struggling with anxiety or learning, or you just want to simply enhance performance. We're looking at all these key indicators to see where are you at. And we can't change all things for all people. If your development is on track and there's challenges, that's not the case for us. So we're going to refer you elsewhere. But I will say, when you look at an individual coming in on the spectrum, oftentimes we're seeing larger gaps across more areas of development versus some other challenges. So ADHD, there'll still be immaturity in balance, coordination, rhythm and timing, visual motor movements. And then we'll see that with autism, but it tends to be even more categories and a larger gap. And so it's not that there's not incredible intelligence there and not great things. It's that oftentimes we've got a body sitting in front of us that all aspects of brain development are not in alignment with that body's development. And then we look at that age to set expectations as parents and teachers and educators and professionals, when really we need to be looking at where are you at in development to know where you are now, and then what we need to do to foster and accelerate that development so you can meet those higher level expectations and demands.
Okay, no, that makes perfect sense. And I think there's a lot of people that might have, I don't know, negative thoughts that they don't need help, or like a common myth that you might wish people would stop believing about brain health or maybe their behavior. People feel that, something's holding them back from getting the help they need. What's something to help get them over the hurdle?
I'm going to generalize here a little bit, but this is having worked with thousands of families across the country and internationally on this topic over the years. One of the things that I hear parents say a lot is, I was that way as a kid and I turned out fine. I don't want my kid to turn out fine. If there is something I can do, this is not a matter of your child's broken, there's something wrong with them. But if there's something that we can do to make it easier to pay attention longer, regulate your mood and emotions more consistently, why wouldn't we? This is not a matter of you're broken or wrong. This is how can we, if there's a gap in development, things aren't functioning optimally. And so if you were an athlete and you had an opportunity to improve your performance, to accelerate your outcomes, you do that. This is the same thing for the brain. We've got an opportunity, and by measuring these key aspects of development, it shows us, as awesome as you are in whatever you're doing, you've got the opportunity to be even better. I assessed, this was years ago, I assessed a full ride college scholarship basketball player to an amazing school, like a really big deal athlete. His body coordination was testing 10 years behind age appropriate. And I was floored, and I was meeting with his mom and he was sitting in the meeting, and I felt funny even saying to her, this amazing athlete can't maintain a cross-ball coordination pattern. And he chimed in and he's like, I couldn't. I knew what she was asking me to do and I couldn't do it. So we had the most amazing conversation of, you are such a gifted athlete that in spite of this, you are still accomplishing what you're accomplishing. What would good look like if you were at age appropriate in those skills and functions? And so to me, the assessment just shows where there are opportunities to make change. We all want to be the best version of ourselves, whether it's for ourselves, our kids, and as parents, when your child isn't living up to what they're capable of. And rarely is it laziness, is it behavior, what you see as a result of their development.
So what does it mean to empower your brain? Like in your lived experience, is there a mindset shift that we're talking about?
Probably a mindset shift in that change is possible, and there's things that I can do in my daily life or programs and interventions that can be an accelerated version of that. So, to me, as a parent, when I think about how do I set my child up for success today, I'm going to start with sleep and exercise and nutrition. I say all the time, it's not rocket science, it's brain science. So, if they're going to go to school and pay attention and interact in an age appropriate manner and make good decisions as high schoolers and do well in their classes, if they run out the door in the morning and they haven't had breakfast, or breakfast in the morning is soda and a Pop Tart, tons of added sugar and ultra processed foods, I cannot expect good attention and good behavior. So lots of sugar is going to spike and then crash energy and attention and focus is going to go right along with that, and memory is going to go out the window with that. And so if I want to not be mad and frustrated with my child for why didn't you, why couldn't you, what are things that I can do to set them up for success? And I think those are things that nutrition can be costly. So some effort and energy and planning into, okay, what are things that you're going to eat? And guess what? If you're going from ultra processed to more in the way of whole foods, kids aren't going to love a carrot if they've been eating a lot of packaged muffins. It's going to be a process. It's a shift, like baby steps, and, start by adding things in before you take it away. But what are small changes that I can make to ensure that their brain has what they need to do what's asked of them in the day? And then what am I doing to ensure for myself and my parents, as we are aging, how do we make sure that we're maintaining that quality of life? It's the same things as what we need for development. We need multisensory stimulation. We need movement. There's incredible studies that show when we stop reading as adults, when we're no longer exercising those coordinated eye movements, there's a degradation in our visual motor system, which then slows down our processing, slows down our interactions with the world. So now suddenly I'm getting cognitive decline. We need to exercise our eyes, our body, our mind on a regular basis to maintain that quality of life as well.
I was going to ask you, so when people listening and they're saying, okay, because you said you work internationally too with clients, right?
Yes, we have, so the Brain Balance at Home program is live coached by coaches at Brain Balance, but you can live anywhere. So I think we've worked with families in upwards of 56 different countries.
Wow. So how do people find out more about this?
Brainbalance.com is the first place to go, and starting with an assessment is a great place to start, where again, we're measuring key aspects of development. Are things on track? Is there an opportunity to enhance that? And then we're always looking to see, does the data reflect the goals that you have for yourself? And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. I can't change all things in your life, but if maturing and strengthening the brain function is going to help you achieve the goals, we'll see that through the consult and conversation and paperwork and intake.
So brainbalance.com. And then how about if they want to learn more about you personally, your website, are you social, whatever, the best place to learn more about you and specifically your book?
Yeah. Back on Track is the book I wrote that's all about kids and development, and it's what you can do at home to get a sense of development and support that. It will never be a replacement for a full program. So it is not a comprehensive assessment and it's not a comprehensive program, but it's for parents. Here's what you can do on a daily basis from home. And then I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram, Dr. Rebecca Jackson. It's me.
And that's your website as well?
Yes.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I learned a ton. People listening, I can't imagine, did not learn a ton from you. And brainbalance.com would be the place to start for a consultation evaluation. And if you want to learn more about working with that company, and then connect with you, Dr. Rebecca Jackson, on social, on those, I'll put those in the show notes. But thank you for your time today and for sharing all of that with everyone.
Thank you for your questions and interest in brain health and development. Clearly, it's one of my favorite topics to talk about, so I appreciate the thoughtful questions.